All right. So this won't be very long, but I do want to talk a little bit about alcohol, because sometimes I'm surprised at how little some college students know about alcohol and the things that they're putting in their bodies. And I teach the neuroscience courses in the psychology department. So we, and I teach a course called psychopharmacology, which is all about drugs and behavior. So we also talk a lot about this sort of stuff. So you guys get a little mini lecture on alcohol, what happens in your body, that sort of stuff, how it affects your behavior and that sort of stuff. But to start with, we are going to play a game. There we go. So we have 6, I'm going to put you in groups. So John, I'm going to have you slide back in the back corner, because this is going to be fun. I'm going to have all the women as one group, so we'll see if you can beat all the men groups. All right. All right. So this group here, 5, you two slide here with them. You guys are a group of 4, and then all over here. So what I want you to do is to come to consensus, put these alcoholic drinks in order from lowest to highest ABV. These are all malted beverages, malt beverages. All right, raise your hand once you've got them in your order. Y'all are good? Okay. Y'all are good? All right. All right. All good? 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 All right, let's... All right. All right, let's do group 1 in the back. Give me your order. Don't change your order based on other people. So what's first? Lowest?
Lowest. Natty Light.
Okay.
Bud Light.
Okay.
Bud Platinum.
Okay.
And then Reds.
Okay.
Select 55.
Okay.
And Great Americans.
And great. Oh, yeah. Okay. The yeah. Malt. All right. Group 2, guys, row guys. Lowest.
Natty Light.
Okay.
Bud Light.
Okay.
Select 55.
Okay.
Red's Apple Ale.
Okay.
Bud Light Platinum.
Okay.
And Great Americans.
Y'all even read that?
Yeah.
All right. Group 3. Lowest.
Blue Natty Light. Bud Light. Select 55.
Okay.
Platinum.
Okay.
Reds. And
Okay, ladies.
We did Reds first,
Okay.
then Natty Light,
Okay.
55, Bud Light, Platinum, and then the
How confident are you? Somebody got it right? Do you all drink these things? Some of them, right? All right, let's see. Here we go. All right, this is the correct order. So none of you got it, right? Everybody got that the malted beverage, right, is the highest ABV, okay? But, and Natty Light, Bud Light they're a toss-up. They're essentially the same ABV, right? So kind of a trick there. So, but 55, right? What does the 55 stand for in Select 55?
Calories.
Calories. How many calories are in a Bud Light? 100, 110, something like that. Where do the calories come from? Alcohol, right? So 55 is half the alcohol of a Bud Light, right? Okay. Then reds, then platinum. The platinum means it has more alcohol. That's what they're telling you with that. We're Bud Light, but we're platinum, right? So, and then you have your multi beverage. So these are the ABVs: 2, 4, 5, 6, and 14, right? So why do we care about this? Why does this matter? Yeah.
It just affects the situation, how many you have, depends on how many people are intoxicated or.
Yeah, all drinks are not created equal, right? If you have one Bud Light Platinum, that's the equivalent of having 3, the alcohol equivalent of having 3 Bud Select 55s, right? So all drinks are different. And I think we pointed out, or hopefully you noticed, that I don't know if this is a law, but pretty much all craft breweries, tap rooms, post their ABVs of their beers, right? It can't be a law because other bars don't do that, but maybe it's just because they vary so much with when they're making their own beers that they want people to be aware, hey, you're drinking a 9%er, or hey, this is a session and it's only 3%, that sort of thing, right? So being aware of that when you're consuming things is important, so you know cognitively like how much alcohol you're putting into your body. Right? All right, so a little bit about appropriate and inappropriate alcohol use, and you guys know this has been drilled into you for a long time. But appropriate use, right? Key is in moderation. Right? Inappropriate use is when you're not in moderation, right? And so why do we say that funneling is, I think that's still illegal on campus, right? You can't have funnels? No? Yes? I don't know. It used to be. Why do we say that these sorts of things could be inappropriate ways? Now, I'm not saying you can't have a shot or something when you, but why do we say that those are inappropriate? Yes?
Just because you don't get to properly taste them and it gets you way too drunk, way too fast.
Yes. So you're putting the alcohol in your body at a rate, right, that is really fast. And when you do that, there's a time lag, right, between when you ingest alcohol and when it starts to affect you mentally, cognitively, right? And if you stop drinking when you start to feel like you're not in control, or you don't have that cognitive ability that you want to have, right? There's still, if you've been putting high amounts of alcohol quickly in your body, there's still a lot of alcohol in your gut and other places that hasn't gotten absorbed yet. So you stop because you're at this one mental level, that's going to continue to decrease because you've already quickly put all that stuff in your body. Whereas if you're slowly consuming it in moderation, right, and you say, whoa, I'm feeling tipsy, I don't want to drink anymore, and you stop, there's not this mass quantity that you've just dumped into your stomach, right? All right. Other inappropriate ways, and this is what gets a lot of people in trouble with alcohol, is when they're consuming it because they are self-medicating, or they're using it as a coping mechanism instead of dealing with the thing that's causing the angst or the anxiety or whatever it is, right? And the reason I say this is what gets people in trouble is because this often leads to the types of drinking patterns that can become abusive, become alcoholic. All right. So, we talked about all drinks are not created equally. In addition to all drinks are not created equal, all people were not created equal, despite what you've been told. And alcohol affects people in different ways. Body weight matters. The smaller you are, the faster alcohol will affect you. Because we talk about alcohol, how do we talk about alcohol in our bodies? If you get pulled over by the police and they want to test you, blood alcohol level, right? And the more blood you have, the bigger you are, right? The more dilute the alcohol is in your body, and the smaller you are, the more concentrated that becomes, right? Body fat also matters. The more fat you have in your body, the bigger the effect of alcohol has, because we're not going to get into physiological issues in that, but it has to do with what this long. And alcohol also has a bigger effect on women than men for a variety of reasons. Some of them have to do with the fact that typically women are smaller than men, so we're back to body weight, but also physiologically men and women are different. They're different in the way that they absorb alcohol, and they're different in the way that they break alcohol down. So the same amount of alcohol for men and women typically affects women more. And I didn't have it up here, but I'll throw in, experience matters as well, right? Your body can build up a thing called tolerance, right? Where if you are used to consuming a certain amount of alcohol, your body becomes used to getting rid of that alcohol. And then it doesn't affect you the same way as someone who never drinks alcohol would affect them. And I should have said, if you guys have questions, if you find this interesting, hopefully you find some part of it interesting. But if you have a question like, oh, well, what about this? Just ask me, because that will make this a lot better for me if you guys have questions. All right, so as Dr. Arrington mentioned, and I'm going to talk about in 2 slides from now, our body breaks down alcohol, has enzymes in our liver. That's what our liver does. And our liver's going to break alcohol down. That's how we get rid of it out of our body. We don't just excrete pure alcohol in your urine. We have to break it down into other chemicals in order to do that process. And that enzyme, alcohol dehydrogenase, is a linear enzyme, meaning it acts at a constant rate. And because of that, we can predict, based on your body weight, and the number of drinks that you've had, right? We can predict what your blood alcohol level would be, right? We can also predict how long it will take to go from a 0.10 alcohol level back down to 0, right? So here, again, we can see that we have, we look at men and women that both weigh 120 pounds, right? Again, women, 1 drink, same drink as one for a man, get an extra 0.1% of blood alcohol levels, right? In fact, if you just look, if you look down here, you can see that that really adds up. So 0.38 versus 0.31. So anyway, this is, I'm sure you've seen this before. You can find your body weight, you can see, okay, how many drinks in an hour, per hour, can you have before you reach level of starting to be impaired is in red, and then the legal limit is 0.10. That's what's below. If you're below this gray area, you're legally impaired to drive. The rate that I mentioned, that alcohol is burned up, is 0.015% per hour. And so you can see how many hours it's going to take. So if you are legally drunk at over a 0.09, it's going to take 6 hours to come back down to 0. You can think about if you were at a 0.2, right? Which for some people, that would be a lot of drinks, right? How many hours would it take for you to go back down to 0? It takes 6 hours approximately for 0.0 or for 0.1. How long do you think it would take for 0.2? Remember, it's a linear rate. 12, right? 12 hours to get back down to 0. How many hours would it take for you to not be legally drunk anymore? 6 hours, right? So that's not a sit around for an hour and sober up so I can drive home, right? So these are the things that I think it's important to kind of understand how your body works so you can kind of understand, hey, you know, if I'm out at a bar at 2 o'clock and I have 0.2%, right? When I wake up tomorrow morning, if this hadn't been 6 hours, right, I could still be legally drunk, right, and still have some of these effects the next day. All right. The effect of it, I said that men and women absorb alcohol at different rates. So I want to show you, this is the same dose of alcohol given, and we're not going to look at the dashed lines because that's getting the alcohol intravenously, which hopefully none of you are doing. The orals, what we're going to look at, which are those dark lines, okay? And there's this thing in our, this process of breaking down alcohol. When things leave our gut, when things come out of our small intestine into our blood supply, the first place they go is the liver. Before they go anywhere else. It goes straight from blood vessels in your gut, directly to the liver, then from the liver out to the rest of the body. And we keep circulating through the liver until the liver can do all the metabolism, get rid of all the chemicals or convert the chemicals into usable chemicals, right? Our body's doing the same thing that we talked about with cleaving those sugars with enzymes. And none of you had a bowl of glucose today, right? Anyone eat a bowl of glucose? No. That would be the most efficient way for you to consume food. But you probably had a sandwich, and the carbohydrates in that sandwich have to get converted from long chains into short things and eventually become glucose, because glucose is the fuel, glucose and oxygen. And it's the fuel that our body needs, right? All right, enough about that. Sorry, I'm going to stay on point here. So this is called first pass metabolism. So when we consume alcohol, it goes directly into our liver, and some of that alcohol gets converted in that first pass. Most of the alcohol goes out through the body and has to get converted on future passes through there. But some of it does that first pass before it ever comes out. And if we look here, we see women and men, if we look at the gender effect, that first pass metabolism is much greater for men than it is for women. So same drink. This is why women have higher blood alcohol levels, because your liver doesn't convert as much in that first pass through as men do. Right. Good? Questions? No. Okay. Now, other things that can affect absorption of alcohol into your blood supply, we'll say don't drink on an empty stomach, right? If you have food in your stomach, right, your stomach is very active. You're increasing digestive processes so the alcohol can get broken down there. But it also slows down the rate of alcohol transferring from your stomach into your blood supply. Right? The effect's much more rapid if you don't have anything in your stomach. And then lastly, I said that experience matters. So what, besides having gender up here, what else is up there? What's it say in front of the woman?
Non-alcoholic.
Non-alcoholic women and men. So, if we look at alcoholic women and men, right, this is their first pass metabolism, right? And this is part of the tolerance buildup. So because they're alcoholic and because they're constantly consuming alcohol, and we're talking about people that wake up in the morning and start drinking, right? Their body has adapted to produce more of those enzymes in their liver, right? So their first pass metabolism, they get a bigger effect. I'm saying the opposite, sorry. The alcoholic women get a bigger and then get a bigger effect than the non-alcoholic. That's why it's called sensitization, not tolerance, and I read that up there. I will talk about other forms of alcohol metabolism that produce tolerance in alcoholics. And it's one of the reasons why your liver can get damaged during alcoholism because it's having to work so hard to get rid of those. It actually becomes scarred, and that's what we call cirrhosis. Right. All right, so experience matters here as well. All right, so we talk about some enzymes. There's our alcohol dehydrogenase, right? How does the liver break it down? Like I said, what we can excrete out of our body is, in our urine, is acetic acid. So just like Dr. Arrington talked about the enzymes and yeast and what they're doing, our liver's doing similar things. So about 95% of alcohol has to be metabolized. We excrete about 5% can sort of leak through into our urine or come out of our respiration, which is why if you are tested for DUI, they have you blow into a device that can measure the amount of alcohol that you're releasing from your lungs, right? So about 5% is not metabolized, but 95%, a majority of it, has to be turned into acetic acid, okay? And while that rate is constant and linear, the rate is different for different people, depending on your genes and how much of this alcohol dehydrogenase your body's making, right? We have to make these enzymes. And people make different amounts of them. So, as Dr. Arrington mentioned, acetaldehyde, our body doesn't like, right? And it turns out that this step, so we go from alcohol, we have to turn it into acetaldehyde, and then we have to turn it into acetic acid, and then we can get rid of it, right? This step here is faster than this step. This step, converting acetaldehyde into acetic acid, takes longer. So if you consume alcohol at a rate faster than we can turn acetaldehyde into acetic acid, right? This is going to build up, and that's why you get hungover, right? You don't get hungover if you drink in moderation, but your body can keep up with getting rid of acetaldehyde. But when you exceed that step and build up a bunch of acetaldehyde, then you feel sick. You have that gastric distress feeling of a hangover. Okay. And in fact, there's a drug that we can give alcoholics to help them not relapse called antabuse. And antabuse blocks this reaction. So if an alcoholic is trying to say, I need some help not drinking alcohol, I'm trying really hard, but I might slip up. If they have one drink of alcohol, boom, they have a bunch of acetaldehyde and they're going to feel sick right away, right? So it helps prevent them from consuming alcohol because they don't feel sick, because they're blocking the ability to get rid of the acetaldehyde with antabuse. Now, what's the issue with that? As a treatment option, huh? Yeah.
Does it damage your liver, having that acetaldehyde not being broken down?
Yeah, so if you were to say, I don't care, I'm going to feel sick, I'm going to drink anyway, that would be really bad, right? But if you're alcoholic and you're trying to stay clean, you're taking antabuse, and you decide that you want to drink, what are you going to do?
Build up acetaldehyde.
Stop taking antabuse, right? Stop taking antabuse, and then you go on your bed and there's no consequence, right? So this isn't like something that they give you a shot and it lasts a month, right? So it can be good for people that are worried about slipping up, but if an alcoholic on antabuse really wants to drink, well, stop taking antabuse and that sort of thing. All right. Does anyone else know an aldehyde that's not acetaldehyde, or a chemical that's an aldehyde that's not acetaldehyde? Formaldehyde. What's formaldehyde? What's it used for? Where's my biology people? You know what formaldehyde is? You smell it for sure. So what's it used for?
Preserving dead stuff.
Preserving dead stuff, right? And have you ever heard about that drinking moonshine can kill you? That's right. If they don't do it, if they don't create it the proper way, right? And that's because, particularly at the start of distillation, ethyl alcohol is not produced, but methanol is produced. And methanol, right, if you drink methanol, this reaction makes formaldehyde, which is how that can kill you. You're actually producing formaldehyde instead of acetaldehyde in your body. And when people talk about you're pickling your liver, this is real. You're preserving it, right? And so it's very important that you know where your alcohol comes from and that it's good alcohol, because you would never want to consume methanol, certainly in any sort of large quantity or in regular basis. All right. So we got the alcohol in our body. Now we're getting it out. That's our main pathway. There's a secondary pathway that's usually not used. It's usually only 5 to 10% of that 95% metabolism. And it's called the microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, or MEOS. And this is the pathway, which you don't really need to know a whole lot about. But in the process of this P450 is what, instead of alcohol dehydrogenase, we're using a different enzyme to convert alcohol into acetaldehyde. And in doing that, it releases free radicals and or oxygen radicals, which are not good for our body, right? Talk about like antioxidant things are good for your body. That's because they're reducing this stuff, right? And so the problem with it, and so this is not normally a problem for people because it's not much of a metabolism. However, heavy drinking and alcoholics, they gain that tolerance by upregulating this system. And in alcoholics, more than 50%, up to 65%, can be this other system, and that also contributes to that liver damage. So in addition to making the liver work hard, we're generating a whole bunch of stuff that's bad for the liver at the same time, right? So this is, you don't want to consume enough alcohol to upregulate this system in your body. All right. General behavioral effects. And you guys certainly have probably witnessed all of these at some point. But people begin to lose some of their inhibition. So alcohol is an inhibitory drug in our brain. It's going to interfere with all aspects of what our brain does. So the way, I probably should have a slide in here about how alcohol does that in your brain, but I'll just talk briefly. When you put a drug that's going to be psychoactive, meaning that drug's going to affect something in your brain, be it ibuprofen or an antidepressant or an illicit drug or alcohol, right? That drug has a mechanism of how it affects your brain. It binds to a particular receptor. So if we're talking about antidepressant drugs, they're binding to receptors to increase the neurotransmitter serotonin in your brain. It has a specific effect on serotonin, this neurotransmitter. Alcohol has a general effect. It can act on a GABA receptor, which is an inhibitory receptor in your brain that causes the brain to generally be more inhibited. GABA gets turned on when we sleep. It's one of the things that causes us to lose consciousness when we go to sleep, right? So alcohol can act on that GABA, but it can also interfere with the neural signaling in any neuron in your brain, which is why alcohol doesn't affect one particular system. It affects all of your systems. It affects all of your perception. It affects all of your motor. It affects your memory. It affects your mood. It has general effects on your body. Right? So under the legal drinking limit, there are effects on your brain. People do become less inhibited. They lose their inhibitions. Their brain sort of is dulled a little bit. Above, we start to see where people start to become loud and boisterous. They lose their self-awareness of sort of how they're acting and their volume level and that sort of thing. Above 0.15, so you can see this is a pretty narrow range, right? Above 0.15 is where people begin to become uncooperative. They're not able to follow commands. They're not able to interact, have a conversation with somebody. Their motor systems are uncoordinated. And your brain says, oh my God, you just poisoned yourself. You should go throw up. It's a natural reflex that when our brain feels like it's in trouble, it's like it has, alcohol always said it's been around a long time, but this system developed, based on people eating things that were going to kill them. And anytime the brain's like, oh, you ate something that's going to kill it, get it out of your stomach. And so that's why nausea becomes associated with that. And then above 0.25, people become very belligerent, eventually lose consciousness, and I don't know the statistics on this. I'm not even sure that someone's done research to publish the statistics on this, but I would say a primary way that people die from alcohol poisoning is they're at this level and lose consciousness, and then they throw up. And then they are unconscious when they throw up, and so they breathe the throw up in and they aspirate. They basically suffocate themselves with their own motion, right? That's usually the way when people are found dead from alcohol poisoning, that's what happened. It wasn't like the alcohol caused their brain to stop. They suffocated themselves because they couldn't make up when they were having nausea, right? Which is why I will say that if someone does have alcohol poisoning at this level, you can save them. You can take them to a medical facility and pump their stomach, get the alcohol out of their stomach, have their airway open, have trained medical personnel, watching them, and they can recover from this, because it's not that the alcohol is going to kill them, right? But you have to be in that proper setting, right? It's also why you should never just let someone sleep it off if you think they're in this range here. It's very dangerous. Nobody would want that on your conscience if you put someone in bed and then they die. So, all right. Effects on mood. Alcohol tends to be biphasic. And a lot of this, people think we know a lot about the brain and neuroscience, but there's so much more that we don't know than we know, right? So behaviorally, we know that as your blood alcohol level is increasing, as it's going up, as you're consuming alcohol, it acts sort of as a stimulant, right? But as it's held steady or falling, that's when that urge to sleep comes on, because it starts to act as a depressant. And I don't think we fully understand why that is. Why would it, if it's going up, it affects the brain in one way, and if it's going down, it affects it in a different. But behaviorally, this is what we know, right? Not everybody experiences the stimulant phase, but everybody will eventually report the depressive phase of alcohol. All right, perceptual effects. We start to get, I said the alcohol affects all of your brain, and I would say 50% of your brain, 50% of the space of your brain is devoted to your sensory systems. Vision in particular is a big user of that, but hearing, taste, smell, touch, probably takes up 50% of your brain. People don't realize that that's kind of the majority of what our brain's doing, is helping us navigate through this world, through our sensory systems, right? So it affects your perceptions, it affects vision, it affects hearing, and it decreases these things. What it does is it increases your threshold, and so it makes it harder for you to see, harder for you to hear, that sort of thing. In terms of vision is very complicated. Vision probably takes up a third of your brain. So out of that 50% that's sensory, vision's a third of that. Is 30%, and all the rest of the sensory systems are 20%. Vision is really super complicated, because look at what I'm doing. I'm like looking at all of you. I see all these colors. I have depth perception. I can see motion, and my brain's able to do this instantaneously without a lag, right? It's not like you moved and then I perceive that even a microsecond really later. I mean, it's really instantaneous. So, and that's really complicated. It's why we need so much of the brain to do that stuff. So these things are some of the most complicated things for our brain to do, are the things that become effective first. That's what I'm trying to get at. So things like depth perception, motion detection, peripheral vision, right? All of those things are really important to do what? Drive a car, right? Driving a car is a really complicated thing as well. And we need to have these things in order to be able to do that successfully, right? There's also decreases in taste, smell, even pain sensitivity, right? So you hurt yourself while you're drunk and you don't feel it until the next morning. It's a real thing. And it's characteristic of the fact that alcohol is interfering globally with all of these processes in our brain. All right, performance. So, motor system, hand-eye coordination, reaction time. When good research has been done, right? You bring people in the lab and you give them a set amount of alcohol and then you test their blood alcohol level. And I can say, I know you're right at 0.05. I want you to do this reaction test, right? Reactions speed starts to decrease at 0.08 to 0.1. Why would that be important? What are the importance of those numbers? What's that?
I said braking. Like in a car, braking.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So this is where we're going to talk about this translating into driving performance. But so where have you seen these numbers before? 0.08 and 0.1.
Legal driving.
Legal driving. So we talk about driving while impaired and driving while intoxicated. Most states have 2 levels of charges that can happen from that. And they didn't just make those numbers up. They didn't say, hey, we only want you to be able to have 1 drink per hour because we're the mean police and we don't want you to have more fun than that. No, those numbers came from the fact that your actual reaction time starts to become impaired, right? And if I'm driving at, 50 miles an hour even on a highway, right, things are happening very quickly, right? And if you need to react to something, even within half a second, you can travel a long distance, right? All right. Hand-eye coordination starts to show deficits as low as 0.01. So again, any alcohol in our body is going to start affecting your brain. It's just when does it become problematic, right? When does it become problematic? Our inner ear also can be very sensitive to the effects of alcohol. And in fact, sometimes people that are heavy drinkers or have even just a bout of heavy drinking might wake up the next day with ringing in their ears because they're having this effect on their inner ear. Kind of like tinnitus that you would have after you're spinning, like you go to a concert and listen to loud music, that ring in your ears, they can have that. And then finally, memory is a big thing in our brain, and so alcohol can produce blackouts where people don't remember anything that happened, even though they were still conscious at whatever level that they were interacting with somebody. But you can also, more common, have things like grayouts where you've actually kind of formed some memories, and if I was talking to you, you could remember our conversation, but then the next day you don't remember. All right. So back to driving performance, and we are close to the end, so bear with me. Okay? So as I mentioned, we start to see these perceptual issues as early as 0.8 to 0.1%. Okay? If I put you in a driving simulator now, so when I give you the reaction test, all I was really doing was saying, hey, every time that light comes on, push this button. And I'm measuring the time it takes between the light coming on and you pushing this button, and when does that time get longer? When does that time get affected? Right? Driving a car, reaction's part of it, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff like vision perception, like a depth perception, and motor hand-eye coordination, right? And so right here, again, and this is 100, but it's really 0.1, is where we start to see an increase in the probability of wrecking that car in a driving simulator. Right? And it goes up really rapidly. Right? It goes up really rapidly. Right? Why does it stop here at about 0.18? Why did it just keep going up? We only got to 70%. Can't we get to 100%?
You pass out.
Because you pass out, right? Because they can't perform the driving simulator anymore because you literally can't, right? Now, what this doesn't account for are two things that affect this. One, drinking experience. So hopefully you've never heard people say this. I heard people say this when I was in college. I think your generation, as I think we pointed out, is a lot better, I hope, about not drinking and driving, because you have things like Ubers, and I mean, I don't know where drinking and riding the blue scooters comes into play, but I'm sure that's but because you have other ways to get home other than walking, right? But in our day, we didn't have that, and so people would be like, oh, get Drew to drive. He can drive drunk. He's really good at doing it, right? And because people do have different drinking impairment levels. But one thing that we do know from research is that your driving experience really matters. And so here, if we look at people that have not been driving very long, can you remember back to when you were 16? How did it feel when you got in the car and started driving? You were like terrified, right? You're like, oh my God, am I going to crash the car? I got to stay on the road. I got to do this. I got to do that, right? Do you feel that way now that you've been driving for 4 years, 5 years? No, it's become a lot more natural and automatic. But these people, right? Their relative risk of having a crash at having even one drink goes way, way up, because they don't have a lot of experience, so any little impairment really affects them. And this is one of the arguments for keeping the drinking age at 21 instead of 18, because if it was at 18, right, we're giving people legal access when they don't have very good driving experience, and it's predicted that the rates of car crashes and that sort of stuff will go up. It's just one of the many different arguments about whether we should, about why the drinking age should be where it is, right? Who's best? We are, Dr. Angel. We're still in that range, right? So we're the ones that this chart is based on, right? 35 to 54-year-olds. And our rate goes up when we get to in this 0.15 range, right? But we're the best. There's one group that I didn't have on here I blocked out that I'm going to identify. So, which is this group. So what happens after 55? The rate goes up, right? Why does the rate of the probability of having an accident go up?
Starting to get into those years where you become a little less mobile, or like able to.
Yeah, have you ridden in a car with your grandparents? Depends on like how old they are, right? But just like an inexperienced driver, alcohol can affect them. Someone who's now starting to have more difficulty driving in a normal situation, right? Because of age, our reaction time and our vision and all that stuff is not as great, right? Alcohol has a bigger effect on that as well. All right. Last little bit. Heading towards the finish line. We're coming around the last curve. Alcohol is particularly, the other place, so I mentioned asphyxiation from being unconscious. The other way that people get in trouble with alcohol is when they combine it with other drugs it has interactions with. So any drug that is also a sedative or also reduces activity in the brain, if you pair that with alcohol, it's what we call a synergistic effect. The sum of that becomes greater than if you just even added them together, right? And so that's why people on these types of medications, or combining these medications with alcohol, become way more intoxicated, and they can have that loss of consciousness way sooner with less drinks than other people. There are also some other things that can affect this. So some heart pressure medicines, blood thinning medicines, these can actually have bad interactions with alcohol. You can have, alcohol can also produce problems in your gut. So it can, if you have an ulcer, it can make the ulcer worse. If you have IBS syndrome, it can irritate that, it can exacerbate that. So alcohol can interact with other things as well. And lastly, this is one you really should know, right? Is if you're hungover and you want to take medicine, that means you probably still have alcohol in your body, right? As you're trying to get rid of all that alcohol and you have all that acetaldehyde. Take ibuprofen. Don't take acetaminophen. Because Tylenol, in the presence of alcohol, can produce toxic metabolites in your liver. And there's a warning on the Tylenol bottle that says, don't take this with alcohol. Because they know that it produces these toxic metabolites in your liver and it can cause liver damage. Not one time, you're like, oh my God, I took a Tylenol and no. Not one time, but over time, these things add up, right? All right. So, you're like, Dr. Bidman, what is moderation? You keep saying drink in moderation. What is moderation? Well, that's a difficult thing to define, actually. But studies, there are studies that say alcohol consumption can be beneficial in smaller amounts. Has anyone ever heard that? What can alcohol be good for? You've heard it, you don't know what it is. How it's good for you. All right. It's actually, it can have effects on your cardiovascular system. So, if you had a big sort of greasy mess, what is one of the best ways to clean that up? Alcohol. Because alcohol is a degreaser, right? And so small amounts of alcohol can actually lower your cholesterol, because cholesterol is like grease, right? And it can have some sort of beneficial effects. 2 to 4 drinks a week decreases the risk of cardiovascular disease, but over 3 drinks a day increases the risk of cardiovascular disease. So a little bit, moderation is good. In excess, it can actually become bad and damaging. All right, so I talked about that. This is our summary, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about laws and home brewing. If you're interested in doing this, what's illegal? The big no-no, selling your alcohol without a license will get you in a lot of trouble, right? Like, go to jail trouble, or tens of thousands of dollars trouble. And I think that's everybody knows that, right? Trading is probably okay, but yeah, and if you're like, hey, I'll trade you this keg of beer that I brewed if you paint my house, that's probably not the right kind of trade. Go into a bottle share where someone else has brewed and they're going to say, hey, let's swap bottles, that sort of thing. You're not going to get in trouble for doing that sort of thing. Transporting. You have to be careful when you're transporting. So, who's ever bought a growler? Just a couple of you. Okay. So, Jonas and John, right? Jonas and John. So, when you bought that growler, what did the bar do? How did they package it and give it to you?
They filled it up and sealed the cap.
And they sealed the cap. They put a little plastic thing on there and they heated it up and it had a little plastic seal on it. That's a really important step, because that's not an open container. When you go get in your car with that jug of beer, that little seal, if you get pulled over, you can say that's not an open container, right? If I fill a growler here and I go to my car and I get in my car and I put it in there and I haven't done that and I get pulled over, that's technically an open container. It's just a screw top, right? And while you probably wouldn't be charged with open container, especially if you weren't drinking, you could be legally. If it's in your trunk, you're okay, because you don't have access to it. So the open container is all about, can I have access to alcohol while I'm driving the vehicle, right? Okay. So that's the legal stuff. What's regulated? There's actually a limit of how much alcohol you can brew in a year. That limit is 100 gallons, which is a lot, but that's 25-gallon brews. So, if you were to brew twice a month, you could exceed that limit, right? Now, If you live in a household with another adult, right, then you can double that, and you can have 200, right? So it's per person. And then ABV. South Carolina's law, and these laws, I should mention, are all different state by state. And I was doing a little research on this, and one of the things that people were sort of warning people about is, hey, if you're taking your homebrew to an event, like your buddy's wedding, like, yeah, I brewed a keg of beer and I'm bringing it to your wedding, and you're traveling across multiple states, you need to know like what each state's law is, because some states have very restrictive, like you can't cross the state line with alcohol if you're not licensed to do that. And so if you were to get pulled over with a keg in the back seat, and the cop says, oh, you're from South Carolina, you just brought that into my state, right? So you have to be careful about that. Sorry, but these are, I got off course there. The ABVs are different in each state of what you can brew. Some states have limits. South Carolina's limit, you can't brew anything, can't create alcohol greater than 17.5%, or else now you are a moonshine, I guess. Do they call that bootleg? Okay. And actually, I learned this week that under 6.5% in South Carolina is actually not considered an alcoholic beverage. It's just weird the way these laws are written. So it's like 0 to 6.5 is sort of not regulated. 6.5 to 17.5%, 17.5. The law says that it has to be in bottles no bigger than 6.5 ounces, which is kind of weird because most home brews are, I mean, you made some beers that are above 6.5, or will be above 6.5%. I don't think anyone enforces that law, but it's on there. So anyway, be knowledgeable about that. All right. This is some good, I'm going to end with a piece of good advice. All right. It's easier to show you this video than to actually do this. So you put the ping pong balls in, and now you put smaller balls in, and they come in, and the teacher's asking, is the jar full? Full now. And they say, yes, it's full. Then he pours sand in. He's like, well, it's not really full because I can pour sand in there. He says, now, is the jar finally full? No. She can pour a beer in there, right? So it represents your life. The balls represent the things that are important in our lives, the big balls. The beads are the secondary things, like your physical things, like your car and your job. Everything else is sand. But if you put the sand in first, and you worry about everything, all the little stuff, then you can't have the important stuff, right? So you need to focus on the big stuff first. But the beer, what does it represent? Well, no matter how full your life may be, there's always room to have a beer with a friend. All right, so Moodle quiz will be posted. But wait, we haven't drunk beer today. And it's Friday, no less. So we're going to go down to the lab, and we're going to have, I brewed 2 beers. I brewed a non-alcoholic beer. Y'all seen the non-alcoholic beers that are coming out? They're becoming the new sort of rage. Anheuser-Busch has one. Heineken has one. Guinness has one. So we brewed a non-alcoholic beer, and I'm going to talk to you about that. We actually tried to brew the same beer with and without alcohol, so I want you to taste and see how close we got. It's a tricky thing to do, right? Well, I'll talk to you about that. So we're going to have a 0%, 6.4%. We're going to have some bell ringer. I know we had that a few days ago. 9%. But then we're also going to have, it's actually 12.5%, Krampus from Cyclops. That's their Christmas beer that's made with the speculoos cookies, dry hopped with the gingerbread cookies. And so we're going to try that. So you get to have some different ABVs today in the lab. So let's go on down there and get our cups. Yeah, I'll hold some. Yeah, let me get my little alcohol game cards back. You gotta do that. That's a whole lot of dreams in the being honest. Let's not forget to do that. Yes.
For Tuesday.